Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 8th of June of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. Of course, the most important and the most interesting updates are coming from Zaporozhye area, from Orekhov bridgehead. As you know, the Ukrainians, it's maybe the first or fifth day of Ukraine's attempt to penetrate the Russian defense orders and to develop their bridgehead on the south of Orekhov in direction of Tokmak. And during the previous day and during the previous night of the local time, the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to penetrate this area, and probably you saw a lot of video, a lot of photo confirmations of those attacks and so on. So let's discuss everything step by step. And everything started at 1 a.m. of the local time. The Minister of Defense of Russian Federation Shoigu reported that Ukrainians have redeployed the forces of 47th Mechanized Brigade in this area, and using the forces of 1,500 soldiers, 150 armored vehicles, the Ukrainians made attempt to attack in direction of Rabotina and in direction of Novofedorovka. After a very heavy artillery preparation, the Ukrainians launched that attack, but the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation Shoigu reported that attack was repelled by the Russian forces, and with the heavy losses, the Ukrainians were forced to step back. And the Minister of Defense reported that as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians lost 30 tanks, 11 fighting infantry vehicles, and 350 soldiers. Also, he added that as a result of fierce fightings on the 7th of June, so the day before the Ukrainians launched that attack, the Ukrainians lost 945 soldiers, 33 tanks, 28 fighting infantry vehicles, and 38 fighting armored vehicles. So the Ukrainians, as you can see, based on the geography, were trying to attack the Russians on the line between such settlements like Nesteryanka, Kopany, Rabotina, Verbovka, Novofedorovka, and Novopokrovka. So this is the area, this is the front line that the Russians were trying to hold during the previous day, during the previous night. And as you can see, most of the attacks, all of those attacks that Ukrainians made in those directions were repelled by the Russian forces. Now let's add to this map and let's move to this app the forces of 47th Mechanized Brigade, because as it was based on the words of report of the Ministry of Defense, that brigade were attacking the Russian positions starting from this night, and the previous day this area was under attack of the forces of 65th Mechanized Brigade in this area. If you remember, yesterday we got a lot of updates that the Ukrainians have redeployed in this area the forces of 116th, 117th and 118th Mechanized Brigades, but today, and we still haven't received any photo or any confirmation from the Russian Ministry of Defense about this redeployment, so that's why I took a decision to move all those brigades back on their position of strategical reserve. So currently, based on the information we have, the Ukrainians have used from strategical reserves the forces of 47th Mechanized Brigade, the forces of 23rd Mechanized Brigade, and the forces of 31st Mechanized and 37th Marine Brigades. So as you can see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 brigades have already been redeployed in this area, and this is a very big number, so it's probably around 20,000 soldiers. I expect that tomorrow and the days after, the Ukrainians are going to move more and more forces in this area and to make more and more attempts to penetrate the Russians' defense orders in this area. When talking about the western flank of Orekhov, the Ukrainians were attacking the Russian positions in direction of Petykhatki, using from Lapkova in direction of Petykhatki and in direction of Zherebyanki. And the Russians are saying that, and we got this update yesterday, that Ukrainians, as a result of the previous attack in this area, managed to establish a bridgehead in direction of Lapkova. Probably this is not a very stable bridgehead, because the Russians made few counter-offensive in this area, and there were a few updates that as a result of all those clashes, the Russians managed to push the Ukrainians to step back from this settlement. But for now, most of the mappers are saying that either the settlement Lapkova or in the gray zone or under Ukrainian control. but all of them confirms that this is not this settlement is not under Russian control, and probably the Ukrainians during the next days will try to develop the bridgehead in this area. And based on the information we have, with the forces of 128th Mountain Assault Brigade and 15th Operational Brigade of National Guard are trying to attack and develop the bridgehead in this area. So for now, this, when talking about Orechov bridgehead, this is the only area where the Ukrainians managed to achieve at least small success by taking this small settlement, and that's it. When talking about Orechov bridgehead, the Ukrainians were completely defeated, and the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation published a video of Ukrainians attacks. As you can see, like a video on this video, you can see convoys of Ukrainian forces. Also, you may see the Leopards tanks on those videos. As you can see, these convoys were attacked by the Russian artillery, and as you can see, the Ukrainians lost a lot of vehicles. Based on some sources, for example, just on this bridgehead between Rabotina and Verbovka, the Ukrainians lost 40 armored vehicles. And of course, it's up to you to believe or not, but we have some video and photo confirmations of those attacks. And this situation reminds me the Battle of Ugledar. But if you remember, in January, the Russians, using the tactics of convoys attacks, were trying to attack Ugledar, and the Ukrainians, using artillery system, destroyed the Russians' attack fist in those areas. And if you remember those days, the Ukrainians were laughing at the Russians tactic to use convoys, but we see that the Ukrainians haven't get any lessons from those battled, and currently they are using the same tactics, trying to attack the Russians using the tactics of convoy movements. One more time, just on the line between Rabotina and Verbova, the Ukrainians lost 40 armored vehicles. People from the bloggers all over the world and different military experts try to calculate the entire losses of the Ukrainians, officially confirmed by the photos and videos, and the number is around 74 armored vehicles and vehicles of different types, including light armored vehicles, fighting infantry machines, fighting armored vehicles and tanks. 74 units of different types of vehicles were destroyed just during the previous days, and we understand that this is not the total, the final number, and the numbers are going to be increased more and more. And a very interesting update during the previous 24 hours we received from the settlements like Zaporozhye, Dnipro and Kharkiv. The Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainians volunteers announced the blood collection. So officially, blood collection was announced in those settlements. So we understand that this is the closest and the biggest settlements to Orechov bridgehead. And as I understand, the Ukrainians are using this railroad ways, of course, to Zaporozhye, then to Dnipro, and after that to Kharkiv. This is like blood, or let's say not the blood, but wounded soldiers logistic. So as I understand, the most wounded soldiers are moved very fast to Zaporozhye. Those whose condition is better to Dnipro, and those who can survive, and there is 100% chances that soldiers are going to survive, are moved to Kharkiv. So this is the blood, these wounded soldiers logistic. Very interesting update. And as you can see, there were no updates about any blood collection announcement in Kryvyi Rog and Nikolaev or Odessa, and probably because these settlements, there is not much time for this process. So that's why if you, for example, want to move soldiers to Kryvyi Rog, probably there is some problems to do this. So that's why the Ukrainians are using straight way that the trains can go forward without stops on this line. So very interesting. Furthermore, the Russians reported that the Ukrainians started using another tactic in this area, and the Ukrainians started usage of the distance mining method, and the Russians provided information about the settlements that were mined using the distance method. And this is a very interesting piece of information, because according to the Russians, the settlements, that the roads in the vicinity of Nova, Solotka Balka, Nova Chenkova. This road was completely mined by the Ukrainians using the distance method of mining, and for these purposes the Ukrainians were using HIMARS systems, and this is very interesting. As you can see, as a result of all those days, the Ukrainians were trying to understand and to find the weak point in Russian defense, and probably they understand that the only thing that they can do for now is that they need to do is to reduce the level of supply and support of the Russian forces in the settlements like Kopany, Rabotina, and Novopokrovka and Novofedorovka, and they can't do this using the artillery systems because they don't have eyes above this territory, because all their eyes were suppressed by the Russian like anti-drone systems and so on. And the only thing for now they can do, the only solution they found, is to like mine this road that the Russians uses for supplying and supporting their forces, and the same situation in the western eastern flank of this area. So this is the tactic that Ukrainians start using, and this is very interesting because I haven't received any reports that the Russians started using distant mining method, because you need to understand that I believe that most of the mines were demined in this area, of course not using the traditional method but using the probably the Ukrainian armored vehicles. Another interesting update about the Ukrainian tanks and Ukrainian armed forces that were used by the Ukrainians in this area is that they were sent to combat line, they were sent to storm the Russian fortifications, and they haven't gave all these attack feast the armored vehicles that were upgraded or where the Ukrainians have established the demining equipment. You know that when a convoy goes to attack, usually the first vehicle that goes in front of the convoy is a tank, sometimes T-72 or T-64, that's upgraded with demining equipment, and this tank goes forward trying to destroy the mines in front of the column. And today we haven't seen such a video or photo confirmations, and most of the Russian military experts and soldiers on the ground were saying that they haven't seen such equipment as well. So that was the biggest fail of the Ukrainian forces during the Battle of Orekhov Bridgehead. Now we have finished with this territory, with Orekhov Bridgehead, and there are a lot of interesting things that we need to discuss more. And the thing is that the Ukrainians, as we discussed, have redeployed the forces of 47th and 23rd Brigade in this area. There are still a lot of strategical reserves, and during the previous days we still haven't seen and still haven't received any attempts or any attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack in direction Nesterenka in Mirne. So probably within the next few days the Ukrainians are going to activate their attacks in these directions. We still haven't received any updates about any attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack from Gulay Pole in direction of Pologi and from Gulay Pole in direction of Fedorovka. So probably the Ukrainians, with the forces that are planning to redeploy within the next few days, are going to use these directions, and they will try to stretch the Russian forces, or probably the Ukrainians will continue pushing and pressing in direction of Tokmak. We'll see. Anyway, this night is going to be very hot as the previous nights, and we'll see whether the Russians are able to continue defeating the Ukrainians. Now we are going to Vremivka tactical bridgehead. There were also few updates from this area, and the most interesting is that Ukrainians continue clashes and fightings for the 178.2 hill in this area. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that they managed to capture that hill, but probably the Russians made a small counter-offensive operation, and the Ukrainians were forced to step back for regrouping. But today the clashes for this hill continues, and probably as a result of all these things, all these clashes, the Ukrainians managed to establish their bridgehead in this area, and now from this territory they control the Russian positions and so on. Another attempt to attack the Ukrainians made from Velika Novoselovka in direction of the settlement Blagodatne, but that attack was stopped and slowed down by the Russians on the northern outskirts of this settlement. And the thing is, the most interesting thing, that the Ukrainians were using the forces of 35th Brigade, and I'll remind you that the main positions of that brigade is located in the vicinity of Marinka, so probably the Ukrainians took a decision to reinforce the 37th and 31st Brigade with some squads from 35th Brigades with one purpose: not to reduce the level of pressure, but that brigade was defeated and was met by the Russians in the vicinity of Blagodatne. When talking about Novodonetsk, the Russians, as a result of counteroffensive operations, managed to push the Ukrainians back from this bridgehead, and the Ukrainian forces were forced to step back on the northern bank of this river, of this small river, and currently the entire front line goes along this river. So this is the front line in this area, and the Ukrainians lost their bridgehead in this on this territory. Furthermore, the Russians published the video of Ukrainians' attempts to attack the settlement. As you can see, the Ukrainians were moving through the fields, and this is the video that confirms that the Ukrainians sent as the first vehicles is regular armored fighting vehicles. And when talking about the particular this video, instead of these armored vehicles, there should be like 264 equipped with the demining equipment, but there were no such type of weapon. And as you can see, as a result of that mistake, the Ukrainians lost almost entire convoy that were moving in direction of these forest lines. And one more time, the problem was that Ukrainians weren't using the tanks that were upgraded with demining equipment, and that was the biggest fail of the Ukrainians, because the mining fields was the most important and the most powerful asset from the Russian side. Currently, the Ukrainians, as we discussed, are trying to fix the situation, trying to increase their own mining assets, trying to mine the Russian territory, Russian supply roads using the distance method. But the results of this process we are going to see just in a day or probably in 2 days. Anyway, this will make some problems for the Russians, so we'll see. Another interesting update from Zaporozhye and Kherson front line is that the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, today visited Odessa. He came and visited Kherson. The Ukrainian sources are saying that he visited this settlement because of like these floodings and so on. But I believe that he visited the Kherson with one purpose: to control the entire offensive operation by himself. He understands and he sees the problems that Ukrainians face during those attempts, during those days, and probably he took a decision because he's responsible in front of the Western countries and NATO countries. I believe he promised a lot, and he just didn't have any other solution but to visit Kherson and start controlling the entire operation by himself. And probably, as we discussed, the Budanov, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, also visited Kherson these days, and also is in Kherson these days, and also he, I believe, controls the entire situation, at least on this bank, at least on this side of Kherson front line. The Russians, by the end of this day, by the end of the 8th of June, launched another massive missile attack from Crimea, and the Russians were attacking. Today, the Ukrainians saw the missiles that were flying above Odessa, and after that there were explosions in Uman region, in this area. So probably the Ukrainians took a decision to use more strategical reserves, and using the railroad ways that goes through Uman, the Ukrainians were trying to redeploy their forces as close as possible to the combat line, or probably there was some kind of meeting, or there is railroad ways, as you can see, going through this territory, or maybe there was other things that the Russians took a decision to hit and to destroy during the battle of Zaporozhye and the South Donetsk area. Now we are going further, and we are going to talk a little bit about Marinka and Avdiivka. We haven't received any updates from this area, from this territory. Probably the Ukrainians were regrouping and were preparing themselves before the beginning of the next wave of attack in direction of Oputne, Vodyane, and probably in direction of Marinka. The Russians reported during the day that they managed to repel every attacks from the Ukrainian side and to restore their positions on the north of Vodyane. So let's wait a little bit to see more confirmation from other sources about restoring control over the positions in this area. Now we are going to Bakhmut, and we received also a lot of interesting updates from this battle. The Ukrainians continue attacking in direction of Klishchiivka using the forces of 5th and 3rd Assault Brigades, and as a result of those attempts the Ukrainians managed to establish small control or develop their bridgehead on this channel, on this like part of the channel, and some sources during the day were saying that Ukrainians captured this channel, and some sources were saying that they have crossed the channel, some sources were saying that they haven't crossed, but anyway the Ukrainians were able to continue advancing, and currently we see their plans. Now they want to restore control over the entire channel, and then they will probably continue moving in direction of Klishchiivka or Andreevka, trying to encircle Klishchiivka from the south. But I'll remind you that there is a very powerful fortifications right after these trenches, right after this channel. When talking about the northern flank, as we discussed, using the forces of 57th Motorized Brigade, the Ukrainians managed to capture positions along these positions, and currently they are trying to accumulate and regroup their forces for further offensive operation in direction of Yagidne and of course in direction of Berkhovka. This is not very suitable positions to attack, but we'll see whether the Ukrainians are able to do and whether the Russians are able to defeat the Ukrainians on this bridgehead. And when talking about Kupiansk-Liman, we haven't received any updates, and one more time I remind you that the Ministry of Defense of Russian Federation haven't provided any updates, any report for the previous 24 hours, as I think that probably they're preparing a big report for these clashes, and the numbers are going to be terrifying. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.